Snowflakes drifted across the midnight sky, landing silently on the icy sidewalks of Manhattan. The city never really slept, but tonight felt cruelly indifferent to the suffering of one woman standing in front of her own apartment door. Emily Carter, 6 months pregnant, clutched her swollen belly with trembling hands as her husband Daniel towered above her with a smirk carved across his face. She had begged him to come home earlier to sit with her, to remember the vows he had once whispered with so much devotion, but instead, he had spent the night wrapped in another woman's arms. When he finally staggered in past midnight, the sharp scent of expensive perfume clung to his shirt, mixed with the bitter tang of whiskey. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed, and his lips curled in disdain. "Emily," he sneered, throwing her small suitcase onto the floor. "This isn't working anymore. You're just holding me back. Look at you. Pathetic, pregnant, and needy. Do you really think a man like me deserves to be trapped with someone like you?" The words sliced through her like shards of broken glass. She had given up her comfortable, quiet life to be with him, choosing love over privilege. She had believed him when he swore he wanted a simple marriage, a family, a future together. Now, standing barefoot in the cold hallway, Emily's heart broke in ways she never thought possible. Behind Daniel, a soft laugh echoed. Vanessa, his mistress, stepped forward from the shadows of their lavish apartment. Her long red dress shimmered under the golden light of the chandelier. Her manicured nails rested lightly on Daniel's arm, her eyes sparkling with cruel amusement. "She looks shocked," Vanessa whispered with mock pity, loud enough for Emily to hear. "Did you really think he'd stay loyal? Sweetheart, men like Daniel don't settle for leftovers when they can have the main course." Emily's throat tightened, tears streaming uncontrollably down her cheeks. Her baby kicked inside her belly, a reminder of the fragile life depending on her, the only pure thing left in this storm of betrayal. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand respect, but her voice cracked into a whisper. "Daniel, please, don't do this. Think about our child." For the briefest moment, Daniel's eyes flickered, but then his lips curled into a cruel smile. He reached for Vanessa's hand, pulling her closer as if to seal the decision. "This child is nothing but an accident," he spat coldly. "And you were a mistake. I don't love you anymore. You're weak, and weakness disgusts me." He swung the apartment door wide open and stepped aside. "Get out, Emily. Tonight, don't ever come back." The icy wind slammed into her face as she staggered backward onto the frozen steps. She wrapped her coat tighter around her belly, but the cold cut straight through her bones. The snow was falling harder now, swirling around her like mocking applause for Daniel and Vanessa's cruel performance. Neighbors' doors cracked open. A few curious faces peeked out from the warm glow of their homes, whispering among themselves. Emily lowered her head, humiliated. The gossip would spread like wildfire by morning. How the proud wife had been discarded like trash while her husband flaunted a mistress. Vanessa leaned in one last time, her voice dripping with venom. "Run along now, Emily. You'll find out soon enough that Daniel and I are unstoppable. You're nothing but a shadow in his past." The door slammed shut. Silence swallowed the hallway, broken only by the muffled laughter echoing inside the apartment. Emily stood in the snow, shivering, clutching her stomach, as another tear slipped down her face. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. With numb fingers, she pulled it out. A single name flashed across the screen: Dad. For years, she had kept her distance from him, ashamed of her choice to abandon her wealthy, powerful family for the man she loved. She hadn't spoken to her father, Richard Thompson, in nearly 3 years. But now, as the cold threatened to choke her and her unborn child shifted inside her womb, she hesitated. Should she call? Emily dropped to her knees in the snow, sobbing quietly. Her body trembled, her mind spiraling with fear and despair. Where would she go? How would she protect her child? She had no money. Daniel had cut off her bank cards weeks ago. She had no friends left. Most had chosen his side, dazzled by his charm. The only person she could turn to was the man she had once sworn she would never need, her father. But would he even pick up? Would he even care? A sudden voice startled her. A neighbor stepped out, wrapping a shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Emily, honey, you can't stay here. You'll freeze to death. Let me call someone. Your family, maybe?" Emily's lips quivered as she whispered, "My father." The neighbor frowned. "Richard Thompson? The CEO? Emily nodded, ashamed. She had hidden her identity all these years, choosing to live as Daniel's modest wife. Now, with nothing left, the truth loomed like a lifeline she didn't want to grab but had no choice. Her fingers hovered over the call button. Her father's stern face flashed in her mind, the man who had built an empire from steel and stone, who had warned her that Daniel was no good. She had ignored him, blinded by love. But tonight, under the cruel weight of betrayal, she realized her father had been right. Completely right. The snow thickened, swirling harder around her frail figure. Emily finally pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Her heart pounded, each second heavier than the last. Would he answer? Suddenly, a deep, commanding voice cut through the cold. Her breath caught. Tears welled again as she whispered into the phone. "Dad, I need you." And in that moment, the course of the entire story changed. Because what Daniel and Vanessa didn't know, what Emily herself had forgotten, was that no one humiliates the daughter of Richard Thompson and gets away with it. As Emily collapsed in the snow, headlights appeared at the end of the street. A black limousine was pulling up, its tinted windows hiding the face of the man who was about to turn Daniel's world upside down. The limousine glided silently through the snowy streets, but inside, Emily Carter sat trembling, her mind spinning with fragments of memory and regret. For anyone looking at her now, tears staining her cheeks, her hands wrapped protectively around her belly, she was just another abandoned wife, a broken woman cast aside by a man she thought she loved. But Emily's story was far deeper than that. To understand her pain, her strength, and the storm about to rise, you had to know who she really was. Emily Thompson was not born into a life of scarcity. On the contrary, she was born into privilege. Her father, Richard Thompson, was a titan of industry. His real estate and technology empire stretched across continents, his name printed in business journals and whispered with both respect and fear in boardrooms. From the outside, the Thompsons had everything: wealth, power, and influence. Yet behind the glittering facade of private jets and penthouse apartments, Emily's childhood had been lonely. Her mother, Catherine, had passed away when Emily was only 13. Richard had thrown himself into work, building his empire higher and higher, as if burying his grief beneath skyscrapers of glass and steel. Emily was raised more by nannies and tutors than by her own father. She remembered peeking through the wide oak doors of his office as a child, clutching a sketchbook in her tiny hands, hoping for just 5 minutes of his attention. Most of the time, he waved her away with the excuse of another call, another deal, another meeting. By the time she reached college, Emily was desperate for something her family's money couldn't buy: genuine love. She studied literature at Columbia University, immersing herself in worlds of words and stories where love was loyal and true. It was during those years that she met Daniel Carter. He was nothing like the polished heirs and future CEOs she grew up around. Daniel was charming, ambitious, and seemingly sincere. He worked at a small startup firm, often juggling side jobs just to pay his rent. He had an underdog quality that appealed to Emily's yearning heart. He saw her not as the daughter of a billionaire, but as a woman who laughed too loudly at romantic comedies and loved hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. At least, that's what she believed. Emily had hidden her last name when they first met. She introduced herself simply as Emily Carter, dropping her mother's maiden name to avoid the weight of her father's reputation. Daniel thought she was just another student, working part-time at a bookstore to make ends meet. And Emily reveled in the freedom of that illusion. With Daniel, she wasn't Richard Thompson's daughter. She was just Emily. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within a year, they were married in a modest ceremony at City Hall. Emily remembered how Daniel had kissed her hand afterward, whispering, "I don't care if we have nothing. As long as I have you, I have everything." At that moment, she believed him with all her heart. She moved into Daniel's tiny apartment, traded designer gowns for second-hand dresses, and embraced life as a modest wife. She cooked simple meals, decorated their space with thrift store finds, and worked tirelessly to support his dreams. When she discovered she was pregnant, joy filled her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She imagined a life of laughter, bedtime stories, and family dinners, the very things she had always longed for as a child. But slowly, cracks began to appear. Daniel's ambition grew sharper, more consuming. He envied the success of others, always comparing himself to men who had more. He began to resent Emily for not contributing more financially, despite her pregnancy. He mocked her simple clothes, her quiet habits, even her devotion to him. And then came the late nights, the unexplained absences, the whiff of perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his shirts. Emily tried to ignore it. She told herself he was stressed, that he would come back to her. She remembered her mother's words, "Marriage is about sacrifice," and so she sacrificed. Her comfort, her dignity, her family ties, all for him. But love built on lies cannot survive forever. The night Daniel kicked her out was not the first betrayal, only the most brutal. Emily had endured his cutting remarks, his cold indifference, even the way he flaunted Vanessa in subtle, humiliating ways. But being cast out into the snow while carrying his child, that was the breaking point. As the limousine carried her closer to her father's mansion, Emily's chest tightened. She had not stepped foot into that house in 3 years. When she married Daniel, Richard had warned her, "He doesn't love you, Emily. He loves the doors you can open." She had shouted back that Richard was cold, controlling, incapable of understanding love. That night, she packed her things and left, determined to prove her father wrong. Now she was returning defeated, humiliated, her worst fears confirmed. Her phone buzzed again. A message this time, from an unknown number. She opened it, expecting perhaps another cruel taunt from Daniel. Instead, the words made her shiver. "We know what Daniel's been hiding. Don't trust him. Call me when you're ready." Her hands trembled. Who could it be? The limousine turned a corner, and suddenly the Thompson estate came into view. The sprawling mansion loomed against the snowy night, its tall windows glowing like silent watchers. Emily pressed her hand to her belly. Her child shifted, as if sensing the tension radiating from her. She was terrified. Terrified of facing her father, terrified of admitting she had been wrong, terrified of what Daniel might still do. But beneath that fear, a spark of something else flickered. Resolve. She was no longer the naive girl who believed in fairy tales. She was a woman, a mother, and perhaps soon, something far greater. As the limousine slowed to a stop at the towering gates, Emily wiped her tears. The past was behind her. Tonight, everything would change. Inside the mansion, Richard Thompson was waiting, not with open arms, but with a steel-cold gaze and a file of documents on his desk. And those documents contained secrets that could destroy Daniel's world forever. Emily woke the next morning in a familiar room that once belonged to her childhood, yet it felt like both a refuge and a reminder of her mistakes. The mural of painted stars above her bed had not changed since she was 12 years old. She used to stare at those stars, wishing for a family filled with warmth, laughter, and love. Instead, she had married a man who turned her dreams into a nightmare. For outsiders, Emily's life with Daniel Carter had looked picture-perfect. Their apartment in Midtown Manhattan was sleek, modern, and styled to impress. The open-concept living room glowed with polished wood floors, oversized windows, and an expensive chandelier that Daniel had insisted on buying, though he claimed it was for clients to see rather than for their home. Their walls were lined with framed photos of smiling vacations, anniversary dinners, and tender moments that were staged more for Daniel's social image than for their private joy. Neighbors admired them. Dinner guests complimented their chemistry. Emily, always graceful, always smiling, kept up the illusion. She wanted to believe it herself. She wanted the fairy tale to be real. But fairy tales fade when the glass is cracked. Behind those perfect walls, Emily lived in silence and tension. The apartment, meant to be her sanctuary, was instead a stage where she acted as the dutiful wife while Daniel perfected the role of charming, ambitious husband. Every detail of the home reminded her of the dual life she was trapped in. The kitchen, with its stainless steel counters, rarely heard the sound of shared laughter. Emily cooked meals, soups, stews, her mother's recipes, but Daniel hardly touched them. "Too heavy," he would say, pushing the plate away. "Vanessa knows better restaurants anyway." The sting of that name left Emily's stomach in knots, though she bit her lip and said nothing. The nursery, painted a soft yellow with tiny glow-in-the-dark stars, should have been a place of joy. Emily had decorated it herself, choosing second-hand furniture and handmade curtains. She wanted her child's first room to be filled with love, not luxury. But when Daniel walked in, his lips curled. "Looks cheap," he sneered. "Do you want our baby to be embarrassed when my colleagues visit? We're not peasants, Emily." Her heart broke each time. The walls that should have echoed with lullabies and bedtime stories instead absorbed Daniel's cutting words and her muffled sobs. And then there was the bedroom. At night, the king-size bed was cold on one side, empty more often than not. Daniel claimed he was working late, meeting clients, networking, but the scent of another woman's perfume on his shirts told a different story. Emily knew it, but denial was easier than confrontation. She convinced herself that once the baby arrived, he would change. She prayed that fatherhood might turn him into the man she had once believed in. But the truth was sharper than her hope. Daniel never intended to change. One evening stood out in her memory like a wound that refused to heal. She had spent the entire day preparing a special dinner, his favorite pasta, wine she couldn't drink but poured for him anyway, candles glowing softly. She wore a dress he once said made her look beautiful, though it barely fit around her belly. She waited. Hours passed. Finally, at 2 a.m, the door clicked open. Daniel stumbled in, shirt half unbuttoned, his hair smelling faintly of vanilla perfume. "Where have you been?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. He chuckled coldly. "Don't start, Emily. You sound pathetic." "I made dinner," she whispered. "I wanted us to." "To what?" Daniel snapped. "Play house? You really think pasta and candles are going to keep me here? Look at yourself. Pregnant, tired, always nagging. You're nothing like the woman I married." Her throat tightened. "But I'm still me. I'm still the woman who loves you." He shook his head with disdain. "You're weak, and I hate weakness." That was the moment the illusion shattered. Their apartment, once a dream, became a prison of lies. Emily realized her marriage was nothing more than a carefully crafted facade, an image for others, a stepping stone for Daniel, and a cage for her. Yet she stayed. Not because she was blind, but because she hoped. Hope is cruel, but it is powerful. She told herself her suffering was worth it if it meant her child would have a family. She convinced herself that Daniel's cruelty was temporary, that somewhere beneath the arrogance was the man who once whispered, "I don't care if we have nothing, as long as I have you." But each day proved otherwise. Daniel was not building a home with her. He was building a stage for himself, one where Emily was nothing more than a background prop. And Vanessa? She was the spotlight he craved. Emily had seen the messages on his phone once, glowing in the dark while he slept. "You're the only one who understands me," Daniel had texted Vanessa. "She's just boring. But with you, I feel alive." The knife of betrayal twisted deep. Still, Emily stayed silent, swallowing her pain for the sake of her unborn child. Now, lying once again in her childhood bed at the Thompson estate, Emily replayed it all. Every room in that apartment had been poisoned by lies. Every smile in those photos was a performance. She whispered to her belly, "I promise you won't grow up in that kind of house. Not a house filled with lies." Downstairs, Richard Thompson sat in his private study. A thick folder lay open on his desk. Emails, financial records, photographs. He had known Daniel was a fraud from the beginning. He had warned Emily, but she hadn't listened. Now, with his daughter back under his roof, Richard's eyes hardened. Daniel Carter thought he was untouchable. He had no idea that the house of lies he built was about to collapse. Richard lifted his glass of scotch and muttered under his breath. He thought betrayal was free. He's about to learn how expensive it truly is. The following morning, Daniel would wake in the same apartment he had filled with Vanessa's laughter, only to find flashing cameras outside and his name splashed across the front page. Fraud. Daniel Carter woke to the sound of his phone buzzing nonstop. Sunlight streamed into the luxury apartment, bouncing off glass walls and polished marble counters. Vanessa stretched lazily beside him, her crimson nails tracing patterns across his bare chest. He smirked at her, confident, smug, as though the world belonged to him. "What time is it?" she purred, her voice thick with satisfaction. "Late enough," Daniel replied. "Let them wait. I run the show now." Vanessa laughed, her eyes glinting with dangerous ambition. She wasn't just a fling. She was sharp, cunning, and hungry for power. She whispered promises of empire into Daniel's ear, convincing him he was destined for greater things. "With me by your side, you'll never need her again," she had told him countless times. And Daniel believed it. He rolled out of bed, pulling on his silk robe. His phone buzzed again. Annoyed, he grabbed it, only for the color to drain from his face. Dozens of missed calls, messages flooding in, notifications lighting up like fireworks. And then he saw it, a headline plastered across every news site. Daniel Carter under investigation for fraud. His hand tightened around the phone. What the hell is this? Vanessa sat up, her smile faltering. Fraud? That's ridiculous. Who would? Before she could finish, the doorbell rang. Then came pounding, loud, relentless, like thunder shaking the apartment walls. Daniel's heart raced. Reporters. Cameras flashing outside, voices shouting his name. Mr. Carter, is it true you falsified contracts? Daniel, what do you have to say about the offshore accounts? Do you deny the affair with Vanessa Lane while your wife is pregnant? He stumbled backward, panic slicing through his arrogance. Vanessa rushed to the window, pulling the blinds just enough to peek outside. Her face went pale. The street below was swarming with reporters, neighbors gawking as microphones and cameras thrust toward the building. They know, she whispered. Someone leaked everything. Daniel's chest heaved. He thought of Emily, weak, fragile Emily who had cried in the snow. She couldn't possibly be behind this. Could she? She didn't have the power. But her father, Richard Thompson. Rage boiled in Daniel's veins. He had underestimated Emily's family, a mistake that could cost him everything. But instead of remorse, Daniel's fury turned to calculation. He turned to Vanessa, gripping her arm so tightly she winced. Listen to me. This is nothing. I'll spin it. I always do. I'll tell them it's a misunderstanding, a smear campaign. They'll believe me. They always do. Vanessa hesitated. For the first time she looked uncertain. She had wanted the thrill, the glamour of being with a powerful man. But now she saw the cracks. She saw the risk. And the glittering life she had imagined began to dim. Still, she plastered on a smile. You're right. You'll handle this. You always do. But deep inside, doubt gnawed at her. Meanwhile, at the Thompson estate, Emily sat across from her father in the study. Richard slid the thick folder of documents toward her. Do you want to see what your husband has been doing? He asked coldly. Emily hesitated, her hands trembling. She wasn't sure her heart could take it. But she nodded. Inside were contracts forged in Daniel's name, emails proving he siphoned money through shell companies, photographs of him with Vanessa at business events where he had claimed to be working late. Every page was another dagger, confirming what Emily had tried so hard not to believe. He was never building a life with you, Richard said sharply. He was using you, using your name, your innocence, your silence. Emily's eyes filled with tears. But beneath the sorrow, a new fire ignited. She had been weak for too long. She had endured humiliation, betrayal, and cruelty. No more. I want him to pay, she whispered. Richard's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. He will. I'll make sure of it. Back at the apartment, Daniel paced furiously. He called lawyers, but most refused to answer. He called colleagues, but their responses were cold. The empire he thought he had built was crumbling, stone by stone. And still Vanessa hovered in the background, watching him unravel. She had once admired his confidence, his bravado, but now she saw desperation. She saw a man clinging to power he no longer had. That night, Daniel appeared on television, giving a statement. He stood before cameras, Vanessa at his side, trying to look composed. These accusations are false, he declared. This is nothing but an attack on my reputation, orchestrated by those who envy my success. But the world wasn't fooled. Reporters pressed harder, asking about the affair, the lies, the fraud. And though Vanessa smiled for the cameras, her hand slipped from his. Emily watched from the Thompson estate, her hand resting on her belly. For the first time in months, she felt something stronger than despair. She felt justice stirring. But justice was only beginning. Because Richard Thompson was not finished. He had arranged more than leaked documents. Court filings were in motion. Subpoenas were being prepared. And soon, Daniel wouldn't just face humiliation, he would face ruin. Yet Daniel, blind to the storm about to crush him, leaned into Vanessa's ear after the cameras shut off. Don't worry, baby. They can't touch me. I'll get everything back. You'll see. But Vanessa, her eyes flicking with uncertainty, thought silently, what if they can? What if you fall? She didn't love him. She loved the power. And if that power vanished, so would she. Daniel Carter was too arrogant to see it. But betrayal was about to come for him. from every direction. The next morning, a court summons would arrive at Daniel's door, and the name on the plaintiff line would send a chill through his veins. Emily Carter, represented by Richard Thompson. The morning Daniel opened the door to find the court summons waiting for him. The last sliver of control he thought he had shattered like glass. The envelope was stark white, stamped with the official seal of the New York Supreme Court. His hands shook as he ripped it open, scanning the lines until his eyes froze on the plaintiff's name. Emily Carter, represented by Richard Thompson. His knees nearly buckled. Rage boiled in his veins. But beneath it was something Daniel hadn't felt in years: fear. The scandal exploded across the city like wildfire. News vans camped outside his building, reporters jostling for a glimpse of the disgraced husband who had not only betrayed his pregnant wife, but also stood accused of fraud and financial misconduct. Social media feeds filled with hashtags: Justice for Emily, Carter Scandal, Mistress Exposed. Tabloids printed side-by-side photos: Emily, fragile and tear-streaked in her maternity clothes, and Vanessa, bold and smirking in her crimson gowns. The captions were merciless: wife in tears, mistress in silk. Every detail of Daniel's double life spilled into the open. Former colleagues whispered to journalists about his arrogance, his shady deals, his late-night parties. Anonymous employees confirmed Vanessa had been paraded through the office like a trophy. Even the doorman at his building sold stories about the nights Emily was left outside alone, waiting for her husband to return. Emily, meanwhile, remained silent. That silence became her greatest weapon. At the Thompson estate, Richard handled the press with cold precision. "My daughter will not be giving statements at this time," he told reporters gathered at the gates. "Her priority is her health and her unborn child. But know this: justice will be served." His voice carried the weight of authority, a promise that the city believed. But behind closed doors, Emily struggled. She had never asked for the spotlight. The whispers, the pitying looks, the endless headlines, they cut deeply. At night, she cried quietly, one hand resting on her belly, whispering apologies to her child. She had wanted a simple life, far from the glare of her father's empire. Now, her private heartbreak was everyone's entertainment. Yet something was changing within her. One evening, Richard found her sitting in the library, staring at the newspapers spread across the table. "Why are you looking at these?" he asked gruffly. Emily lifted her chin. Her eyes were red from tears, but there was steel in her voice. "Because I need to stop being the woman people pity. I need to become the woman Daniel never thought I could be." Richard studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. For the first time in years, he saw his wife Catherine's fire in Emily's eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel and Vanessa's world was collapsing. Invitations to galas vanished. Business partners withdrew support. Vanessa's Instagram account, once filled with glamorous photos, was flooded with comments calling her a homewrecker. Brands cut ties, sponsors vanished. She tried to laugh it off, but the sting of rejection burned. At Daniel's office, the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Photos of him and Vanessa plastered across front pages made investors nervous. Deals were frozen. Stock prices dipped. By the time Daniel stormed into the boardroom demanding loyalty, he found only cold stares. "You're a liability, Daniel," one board member said. "Your scandal is costing us millions. Until this is resolved, your position is suspended." Daniel slammed his fist against the table. "You can't do this to me. I built this company." "No," the chairman replied icily. "You used this company, and now it's over." Vanessa's mask began to crack. She had chosen Daniel for his ambition, his promise of power. But as she watched him unravel, his temper raging, his voice desperate, her admiration curdled into doubt. She had bet on the wrong man. The final blow came when a leaked video surfaced. It was grainy, filmed at a late-night bar, but the audio was crystal clear. Daniel's voice, slurred with alcohol, sneering, "My wife's nothing but dead weight. Once the kid's born, I'll send her packing. Vanessa's the only future I care about." The video went viral overnight. Emily watched it in silence, her heart heavy. She had always known, deep down, but hearing the words out loud broke something inside her. She touched her belly, whispering, "You'll never hear him call you an accident. You'll only know love." Public opinion shifted entirely. Where once Emily had been seen as a fragile victim, now she was celebrated as a symbol of strength. "Stand tall, Emily," signs read outside the courthouse. Strangers sent her letters of support. Women across the city shared their own stories of betrayal, calling her a voice for them all. For Daniel, the walls closed in tighter. His apartment, once a fortress of arrogance, now felt like a cage. Paparazzi shouted his name day and night. Neighbors avoided him. Even Vanessa began packing her things in secret. She had no intention of going down with him. "Where are you going?" Daniel snarled one evening, catching her with a suitcase. Vanessa lifted her chin. "I didn't sign up for this. I wanted power, Daniel, not poverty. You're finished, and I don't intend to be dragged down with you." "After everything I gave you?" he shouted. "You gave me nothing," she shot back, "and you're about to lose everything." She slammed the door behind her, leaving Daniel alone in the wreckage of his empire. At the Thompson estate, Emily stood before a mirror, wearing a simple but elegant black dress. Richard entered, carrying a stack of legal papers. "Tomorrow is the first hearing," he said. "Are you ready?" Emily turned, her eyes steady. "Yes, no more hiding, no more silence. I want the world to see me." Richard's stern face softened just slightly. "Then tomorrow, they will." As Emily stepped into the courthouse the next morning, flashing cameras surrounded her. And waiting inside, for the first time since that snowy night, was Daniel. His eyes filled not with love, but with venom. The courthouse echoed with the clamor of journalists shouting questions and cameras clicking like gunfire. Emily kept her head down, one hand on her swollen belly, the other clutching Richard's arm for support. The flashes were blinding, the voices deafening. "Emily, how do you feel about Daniel's affair? Do you believe Vanessa will testify against him? Are you worried about raising the baby alone?" She ignored them all, forcing her feet forward. Each step felt like walking through a storm, her lungs tight, her heartbeat wild. By the time she reached the courtroom doors, her legs were trembling. Inside, Daniel was waiting. He sat at the defendant's table, his once polished suit wrinkled, his expression dark. The sight of him made Emily's breath catch. She had loved this man. She had built her world around him, and now he sat across the aisle like a stranger, an enemy. His eyes locked on hers, filled with venom. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something that made the man smirk. Emily's stomach turned. The proceedings began. Lawyers exchanged words sharp as knives. Financial records were displayed, photos of Daniel and Vanessa together projected for the court to see. Every detail of his betrayal played out before an audience of strangers. Emily sat frozen, tears threatening to spill, as though her private pain had been put on the stage for the world to judge. When her name was called, she stood, her knees weak. Richard gave her a reassuring nod, but the walk to the witness stand felt endless. She swore to tell the truth, then faced the courtroom. The opposing lawyer rose, his questions were brutal. "Mrs. Carter, is it true you left your father's estate against his wishes to marry Daniel?" "Yes," she whispered. "Is it true you chose love over the security your family offered?" "Yes." "And now would you say your poor judgment has resulted in this disaster?" Her face flushed. The words stabbed her like needles. Poor judgment, disaster. She wanted to scream that she wasn't the one who lied, who cheated, who stole. But the weight of humiliation silenced her. When she glanced at Daniel, he was smirking. That smirk broke her. By the end of the session, Emily could barely stand. She hurried from the courtroom, ignoring the reporters calling her name, and stumbled into the bathroom. There alone, the dam broke. She leaned against the sink, sobbing uncontrollably. Her reflection in the mirror looked unrecognizable, pale, hollow-eyed, broken. "Why?" she whispered. "Why wasn't I enough?" Her belly shifted, a small kick beneath her palm. The reminder of the life inside her brought no comfort, only deeper guilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her baby. "I should have protected us. I should have seen the truth sooner." Her chest tightened, panic clawing at her throat. She gasped for air, her vision blurring. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might collapse right there on the cold tile floor. The bathroom door creaked open. Richard entered, his expression unreadable. He crossed the room, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Emily." She shook her head violently. "I can't do this, Dad. I can't sit there while they humiliate me. I'm not strong enough." Richard's voice was firm but not unkind. "You are stronger than you think. But if you collapse now, Daniel wins. Is that what you want?" She squeezed her eyes shut, tears falling faster. "All I wanted was a family. Was that so wrong?" Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment he saw his late wife in her, fragile yet full of fire. He pulled her into a brief embrace, awkward but sincere. "You will have a family, but not with him. Trust me." Still, doubt gnawed at her. That night, back at the estate, Emily lay in bed, wide awake. Every cruel word Daniel had ever said replayed in her mind. Pathetic, weak, mistake. The headlines echoed too. Pregnant wife humiliated. Carter scandal deepens. She felt trapped, drowning in shame and fear. Her baby shifted again, and she burst into tears. "How can I be a mother like this? How can I protect you if I can't even protect myself?" The storm inside her grew darker. For the first time, she wondered if maybe Daniel had been right. Maybe she really was weak. Her thoughts spiraled until dawn. When the first light broke through her curtains, Emily still hadn't slept. She walked to the balcony, staring down at the city. The cold wind whipped her hair as she gripped the railing, her tears freezing on her cheeks. The weight of it all pressed down, her broken marriage, her public humiliation, her unborn child depending on her. For one terrifying second, she felt the urge to let go, to escape it all. But then, a voice stopped her. "Mom?" Emily spun around. It wasn't her baby, it was a memory. Her own mother's voice, gentle, echoing from years past. "Strength isn't about never falling, Emily. It's about standing up again, even when it hurts." Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor, sobbing, clutching her belly. "I can't fall. Not now. Not with you inside me." Later that day, Richard entered her room carrying an envelope. "You need to see this." Inside were more documents. Evidence, not just of fraud, but of something darker. Offshore accounts linked to Daniel's name. A hidden fund meant to drain Emily of her inheritance. Emails between Daniel and Vanessa, plotting to take control of Thompson Enterprises once Richard was out of the way. Emily's hands shook as she read. Her despair gave way to something else. Anger. Burning, righteous anger. All the humiliation, all the tears, all the shame. It had been his weapon. He had broken her down to make her easier to destroy. But he had underestimated her. For the first time, her reflection in the mirror didn't look broken. It looked determined. The next morning, Emily walked into court not in tears, but with fire in her eyes, and a sealed envelope in her hand that would change everything. The second hearing was nothing like the first. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their microphones ready, their cameras flashing in anticipation. The scandal was no longer just gossip, it was front-page news, dominating headlines nationwide. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next in the war between Richard Thompson's daughter and the man who had betrayed her. Emily arrived in a black coat, her hair neatly tied back, her face calm but resolute. She no longer looked like a fragile, broken wife. She looked like a woman who had found her footing. At her side was Richard, his presence commanding respect and fear in equal measure. The crowd hushed as they walked through the courthouse doors. Inside, Daniel was waiting, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He looked thinner, the weight of scandal eating away at him. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. She had distanced herself once the tabloids labeled her the Scarlet Mistress. Daniel sat alone, abandoned by the woman he had risked everything for. When Emily took the stand, a sealed envelope clutched in her hands, the entire courtroom leaned forward. Her lawyer rose. "Mrs. Carter, do you have new evidence to present?" Emily's heart raced, but she nodded. Slowly, she opened the envelope and handed the contents to the judge. Murmurs filled the courtroom as documents were passed around. The judge adjusted her glasses, scanning the pages. Her brow furrowed. "These are offshore bank records. They indicate accounts in the Cayman Islands, controlled by Mr. Carter. Funds appear to have been transferred illegally from Thompson Enterprises subsidiaries." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's lawyer leapt to his feet. "Objection. This is outrageous. Where did she even obtain these documents?" Richard stood, his voice cutting like steel. "Through legal investigation. My security team uncovered them while auditing company records. This is not speculation. It is fact." The judge rapped her gavel for order. "If verified, these documents demonstrate clear embezzlement. Mr. Carter, do you wish to respond?" Daniel's face flushed crimson. He stammered, It's not what it looks like. Those accounts, they're business investments." The courtroom erupted in laughter and whispers. Emily sat taller, her gaze steady. For months, she had been the victim. Now she was holding the dagger that could end him. But the documents revealed more than just stolen money. Among the records was a chain of emails, messages between Daniel and Vanessa. Emily's lawyer read aloud. Once Richard's out of the picture, we'll take control of the company through Emily's shares. She'll be too naive to realize until it's too late. We'll have everything. The words echoed like gunshots in the courtroom. Emily felt her stomach twist. She had known betrayal, but seeing the proof of their calculated cruelty hit harder than any insult. They hadn't just wanted her gone, they had wanted to destroy her completely. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. Those emails are fake. But his voice cracked and the sweat on his brow betrayed him. The judge leaned forward. If these are authentic, Mr. Carter, you are facing not only fraud charges but conspiracy charges as well. Emily's hands shook, not from fear but from the surge of empowerment rushing through her. For the first time she was no longer surviving, she was fighting back. Daniel, sensing his empire slipping through his fingers, tried a different tactic. He turned to Emily, his voice low and pleading. Emily, listen to me. We can fix this. You don't want our child growing up without a father, do you? I made mistakes, but I did it for us, for our future. Emily's heart ached. A part of her deep down still remembered the man she had once loved, but that man no longer existed. In his place sat a liar, a thief, and a betrayer. She looked him straight in the eye and said softly, You didn't do it for us. You did it for yourself. And our child will be better off never knowing the kind of man you've become. Her words silenced the room. For Daniel, it was the final blow. He slumped back in his chair, his face pale. He had played every card, charm, manipulation, anger, and now he had nothing left. But the twist was not over. As the hearing adjourned, Emily and Richard stepped outside into the flashing lights of reporters. Just as they prepared to leave, a figure emerged from the crowd. Vanessa. She was disheveled, her once polished look replaced by desperation. Her eyes darted nervously as reporters swarmed. I have something to say, she shouted. The crowd froze. Cameras turned. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice trembling. Daniel promised me everything, she said. He told me we'd run the company together, that Emily was weak, useless. But when I realized he was losing, he tried to pin everything on me. He forged my name on contracts. He told me to be the scapegoat if it all fell apart. The crowd erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted, microphones thrust forward. Emily stood frozen, her chest tight. She had expected Vanessa to stay silent or defend Daniel, but betrayal breeds betrayal. Vanessa's tears streamed as she continued. I was a fool. I thought he loved me, but he used me, just like he used her. And I won't go down for him. The confession hit the air like lightning. Daniel had lost his mistress, his allies, his company, and now his last shred of dignity. Emily turned away, overwhelmed. For so long, she had lived under Daniel's shadow. But now, the spotlight had shifted. He was the villain exposed, and she, the woman he had tried to destroy, was still standing. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. It's over, he murmured. But Emily shook her head. No, it's just beginning. The judge announced an emergency motion. Daniel Carter would face immediate asset seizure pending trial. And in 3 days, Emily herself would take the stand again, not as the victim, but as the rightful heir to everything Daniel had tried to steal. The days following Vanessa's explosive confession felt like a storm clearing after months of suffocating darkness. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily could breathe. But breathing was not enough. She stood in front of the mirror in her father's mansion, staring at the woman looking back at her. Pale skin, tired eyes, hair falling loosely around her face. She still saw the broken wife, the woman Daniel had called weak, pathetic, useless. She hated that reflection because it was the one he wanted her to believe. That version of Emily was gone. Richard walked into the room carrying a sleek black box. This is for you, he said, placing it on the vanity. She frowned. What is it? Armor, he replied simply. Inside was an elegant tailored suit dress, black silk, sharp lines, power stitched into every seam. There were matching heels, modest yet commanding. It wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration. Emily touched the fabric, her hands trembling. I don't know if I can wear this. I don't feel strong enough, Richard finished. He placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Emily, strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you claim when life gives you no other choice. That man tried to destroy you. Now you decide who you want to be. She stared into the mirror again. Slowly, she tied her hair back into a sleek bun, applied subtle but deliberate makeup, and slipped into the suit. When she stood up, she didn't just look different, she felt different. The woman in the mirror wasn't Daniel's discarded wife anymore. She was Richard Thompson's daughter. She was a mother, she was a survivor, and soon she would be a victor. The transformation didn't stop with her appearance. Emily began to train her mind too. Richard's legal team prepared her for the courtroom battles ahead. She studied every document, every timeline, every loophole Daniel had tried to exploit. She listened to recordings, read witness statements, and rehearsed her testimony until her voice no longer shook. At night, when fear threatened to creep back in, she would place her hands on her belly and whisper, "I'm doing this for us." Meanwhile, the media spun her new image. Photographs of Emily walking confidently into the courthouse replaced the old tabloid shots of her crying in the snow. Headlines shifted, from victim to fighter. Emily Carter emerges stronger. Betrayed wife turns warrior. The city loved her transformation. Women across the country wrote letters, saying she gave them courage to leave toxic relationships. Men who had once mocked her now admired her resilience. Her story had become bigger than her. It was a symbol of survival and justice. But Daniel wasn't done. In his penthouse, now stripped of luxury as accounts were frozen and assets seized, he raged. Vanessa had betrayed him, his colleagues had abandoned him, and Emily, weak, foolish Emily, was suddenly on every front page as the hero. "No," he growled at his lawyer. "She doesn't win. Not her. I'll drag her down if it's the last thing I do." His lawyer hesitated. "Daniel, with Vanessa's testimony, the fraud evidence, and the public opinion, your chances are slim." "Then we make new chances," Daniel snapped. His eyes burned with the desperation of a man cornered, ready to strike. Back at the estate, Richard and Emily prepared for the next phase. A gala had been announced, one of the city's most prestigious charity events. Daniel was rumored to be attending, desperate to save face and convince investors he still had influence. Richard turned to his daughter. "You need to be there, not just as my daughter, as Emily Carter, the woman he underestimated." Emily hesitated. "You want me to walk into the same room as him, in front of everyone?" "Yes," Richard said firmly. "You will walk in, and you will show them all that he didn't break you. You will show them who you really are." Emily swallowed hard. The thought of facing Daniel in public, of seeing his sneer and enduring his venom, terrified her. But she also knew this was her chance to rewrite the story. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, diamonds, and the chatter of the city's elite. Daniel entered first, his smile forced, his suit immaculate, but his eyes haunted. Whispers followed him like shadows. Then the doors opened again. Emily walked in. The room went silent. Heads turned, gasps filled the air. She wore the black suit dress Richard had given her, her posture tall, her gaze steady. At her side was not just her father, but several powerful allies who had aligned themselves with her since the scandal broke. She moved through the room with quiet grace, the cameras capturing every step. Daniel's face twisted. For a moment, fear flickered in his eyes. Then anger. He stalked toward her, his voice low and seething. "You think you've won because you parade around in your father's shadow? You're still nothing without me." Emily looked him dead in the eye. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "I was nothing with you. Without you, I am everything." The words hit harder than any slap. Daniel froze, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. The crowd murmured, cameras flashed, and Emily walked past him, her head held high. For the first time, she felt free. The gala became her stage. She mingled with business leaders, spoke confidently about charity initiatives, and even smiled for the press. Every gesture told the world she was not just surviving, she was thriving. And while Daniel seethed in the corner, ignored and avoided, Emily glowed in the spotlight he once thought was his alone. But her transformation was not complete until she faced the courtroom again. The next day, she stood before the judge once more. This time, her voice was steady, her testimony clear. She outlined Daniel's lies, his manipulation, his betrayal, not with bitterness, but with strength. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, her words cutting deeper than any lawyer's argument. When she stepped down, the audience applauded softly, even the judge acknowledging her composure. Emily had not just told her story, she had claimed her power. Later, As she left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. One asked, "Emily, what do you want now?" She paused, her hand resting on her belly, and answered simply, "Justice and peace for my child." The next hearing would not be just legal, it would be public reckoning. Emily's transformation was complete, and now she was ready for the ultimate confrontation. Destroying Daniel in front of everyone. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled, every aisle lined with reporters and curious onlookers. The scandal of Daniel Carter had become the city's obsession, and today promised the climax, Emily's final confrontation with the man who had betrayed her. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table, her black suit dress crisp, her hair perfectly pulled back. She was calm, poised, her hand resting gently on her belly. Richard sat beside her, his presence like an unspoken shield. Cameras outside broadcasted every moment live, millions watching across the country. Daniel entered late. His suit hung awkwardly on him now, no longer the perfect fit of confidence, but the stiff armor of a man crumbling. His eyes darted nervously as whispers filled the room. Without Vanessa at his side, he looked smaller, diminished. The mistress who once paraded beside him in crimson gowns had vanished, leaving him to face his ruin alone. The judge called the session to order. "We will hear the final testimonies today." Daniel's lawyer rose first, painting him as a victim of circumstance, a man caught in the crossfire of a powerful family. "Mr. Carter may have made mistakes, but he is not the monster portrayed in the press," the lawyer argued. "This is nothing more than a vendetta by the Thompson Empire." But the judge's expression remained unmoved. The evidence spoke louder than any plea. Finally, Emily's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we call Emily Carter to the stand." A hush fell over the courtroom. Emily rose, her steps steady, and took her seat at the witness box. She looked directly at Daniel as she spoke, her voice clear. "For years I believed in a marriage that was built on lies. I gave up my family, my name, my security, because I thought love was enough. I thought I could build a home with Daniel Carter. But what I found was manipulation, betrayal, and cruelty." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes narrowing. Emily continued, her tone sharper now. "While I carried his child, he spent nights with another woman. While I built a nursery, he built offshore accounts to steal from my family. And when I begged him to stay, he threw me into the snow." Gasps echoed through the room. Daniel's jaw tightened. "But this isn't just about me," Emily said firmly. "It's about a man who thought he could use people like stepping stones. He used me. He used Vanessa. He used anyone who trusted him. And now he faces the consequences." The lawyer handed Emily a folder. Inside were the final documents, proof of forged signatures, stolen funds, and fraudulent contracts. She placed them before the judge with deliberate calm. "This is the truth," she said, "and the truth cannot be erased." The judge examined the evidence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a glare. Daniel snapped, his voice rising. "You think you're so powerful now, Emily? You're nothing without me. You're only here because of your father." Emily met his outburst with calm steel. "No, Daniel, I'm here because of me, because I chose to stop being silent. You underestimated me, and that was your greatest mistake." Her words struck like thunder. The crowd stirred, nodding, whispering, even applauding softly before the judge demanded order. Richard leaned back in his chair, pride flickering in his eyes. For years he had doubted his daughter's strength. Today, she proved him wrong. The judge finally spoke. "Mr. Carter, the evidence is overwhelming. Pending trial, your assets will remain frozen. Furthermore, charges of fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement will proceed to the next phase." Daniel's face collapsed in despair. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras outside flashing like lightning as updates hit the airwaves. The once proud man who had sneered at his wife was now cornered, powerless. But Emily wasn't finished. As the session ended, she rose slowly, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "Daniel, I want you to remember this moment. You tried to destroy me. You called me weak, pathetic, a mistake. But look at me now. I'm still standing. And you've lost everything." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, he looked defeated. The courtroom erupted. Applause, gasps, flashes of cameras. The image of Emily standing tall while Daniel slumped in his chair would dominate the headlines for weeks. Outside, the crowd surged as Emily emerged with Richard at her side. Reporters shouted, "Emily, do you feel vindicated?" What's next for you? Do you forgive him? She paused, lifting her chin. Forgiveness is not mine to give. Justice is what matters now. For me, for my child. Her words were played across every news channel that night. Millions of women saw themselves in her, broken, betrayed, but rising stronger. She had become not just a story, but a movement. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to his apartment, now besieged by reporters. Alone, stripped of allies, abandoned by Vanessa, he stared at the empty walls. His empire was gone, his reputation shredded, and the one woman he thought he could break had become the very force that destroyed him. But Emily's journey wasn't over. The court trial would continue, and Daniel still had the potential to lash out like a cornered animal. That evening, Richard entered Emily's study. "You've won today," he said. Emily shook her head. "No, Dad, today was only the beginning. The world needs to see him fall completely. I won't stop until there's nothing left for him to hurt anyone else with." Richard studied her quietly. For the first time, he didn't see the little girl who once begged for his attention. He saw a woman standing in her own power. The final showdown was coming. The gala where Emily would confront Daniel in front of the city's elite, not just in a courtroom, but on the grandest stage of all, where his humiliation would be sealed forever. The night of the gala was unlike any other. The ballroom glittered beneath golden chandeliers, the air heavy with perfume, ambition, and whispered scandal. New York's elite had gathered in their finest gowns and tailored tuxedos, but no one came for the auction or the music. They came for the spectacle. Emily Carter and Daniel Carter, face to face for the last time. Emily stepped from her father's limousine, the flash of cameras lighting up the street like 1,000 suns. She wore a sapphire gown that shimmered with every step, her hand resting proudly on her pregnant belly. Her father, Richard Thompson, walked beside her, his arms steady, his presence unshakable. Inside, the crowd turned to watch her entrance. She no longer looked like the weeping woman abandoned in the snow. She radiated power, grace, and resilience. Whispers rushed through the room like wildfire. Daniel was already there. He stood near the bar, clutching a glass of champagne with white-knuckled fingers. His once perfect smile was gone, replaced by the bitter smirk of a man clinging to the fragments of his pride. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. She had already sold her story to the tabloids, condemning him in exchange for her own survival. He was utterly alone. The moment Emily and Daniel locked eyes, silence fell. It was as if the entire ballroom held its breath. Daniel forced a laugh, raising his glass. Well, the prodigal daughter returns, dressed like a queen, no less." Emily walked closer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "No, Daniel," she said softly, her voice carrying across the room. "The queen was always here. You just never saw her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, sneering. "You think this dress, this spotlight, changes anything? You're still nothing without me." Emily's eyes hardened. She lifted her chin. "You're wrong. I was nothing with you. Without you, I've become more than I ever imagined." The audience erupted. Some clapped softly, others whispered furiously, the tension electrifying. Richard stepped forward, handing a sealed envelope to the gala's host. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, his voice booming, "since the press is already here, perhaps it's time for the truth to be revealed in full." The host opened the envelope, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. He handed it to the projector technician, and within moments, a massive screen lit up behind the stage. Emails, bank transfers, photos. Every dirty secret Daniel had tried to bury now glowed in 10-foot letters for the entire city's elite to see. The room filled with gasps and murmurs. One email, enlarged for all to read. "Once Richard is gone, Emily will be nothing. We'll take it all." Another, "The baby is just leverage. She'll never see it coming." Emily stood tall as the words filled the room, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. This was her moment, not just revenge, but truth, justice, and freedom. Daniel staggered forward, his face pale. "This is lies, all of it. She planted this." But no one believed him. The crowd turned their backs. Businessmen whispered about cutting ties. Former friends shook their heads in disgust. Investors walked away. Vanessa's voice suddenly echoed from a speaker. A video recording played, her confession taped during a deposition. "Daniel told me to help him destroy Emily. He forged signatures, stole money, and promised me everything. But in the end, he planned to throw me away too. Daniel's mouth fell open. His own mistress had sealed his fate. The room erupted. Applause, gasps, even laughter at the downfall of a man who had once strutted through these circles with arrogance. Emily stepped closer to him, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "You told me I was weak. You told me I was nothing. But tonight, everyone sees the truth. The only weak one was you. And now, you'll pay for everything." Daniel's glass slipped from his hand, shattering across the marble. His face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, security approached. Richard handed the final document to them, a court order signed earlier that day. Asset seizure, arrest warrant. The end. Daniel lunged toward Emily, his voice hoarse with desperation. "You can't do this to me, Emily, please! Don't let them take everything. I loved you once." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but not of sorrow, of closure. "You never loved me, Daniel. You only loved what you could take from me. And now you've lost it all." Security dragged him away as the crowd watched, some with pity, most with satisfaction. The once proud man who had mocked and humiliated his wife was reduced to a broken figure, fighting against the inevitable. Cameras captured every moment, broadcasting his downfall to millions. When the doors closed behind him, the ballroom erupted in applause. Not for his destruction, but for her victory. Emily stood on the stage, radiant, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She had not just survived, she had triumphed. Richard joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she smiled softly. "I finally understand her words. Strength isn't about never falling, it's about rising again." The crowd quieted as Emily stepped forward, her voice carrying across the grand hall. "Tonight isn't just about me. It's about every woman who's ever been told she was weak, every wife who's been betrayed, every mother who's been left behind. We are not mistakes. We are not weak. And no man has the right to take our dignity." Applause thundered, louder than the music, louder than the whispers of scandal that had once defined her life. Outside, headlines lit up. Emily Carter destroys cheating husband at gala. Justice served in stunning public showdown. Betrayed wife becomes symbol of strength. Later that night, as Emily returned home to the Thompson estate, she stood on the balcony, gazing at the stars. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the gentle kicks of her unborn child. "You'll grow up knowing love," she whispered. "Not lies, not cruelty, love." Richard stepped beside her, silent but steady. For the first time in years, Emily leaned against him, not as the rebellious daughter, but as the woman he had always hoped she would become. Strong, wise, unbreakable. Daniel Carter's name would fade into scandal, a cautionary tale of arrogance and betrayal. Vanessa would be remembered only as the mistress who betrayed him in the end. But Emily? Emily Carter would be remembered as the woman who stood tall, who turned her pain into power, who taught the world that no betrayal could silence the strength of a mother's love. A man may betray his wife, a mistress may think she wins, but in the end, justice comes. And sometimes, justice wears the face of the very woman they tried to destroy. So that's how our story comes to an end. My dear friends, you're still here with me, right? If you've stayed until now, it means something in this journey touched your heart in its own quiet way. And maybe that's the lesson. Life will break us, but it also gives us the strength to rise again. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Emily's pain became her power, and so can yours. Remember, betrayal, heartbreak, failure, they don't define us. What defines us is how we stand back up, how we choose love, dignity, and truth. If this story gave you even a spark of courage or comfort, then share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us, because together we'll keep finding stories that heal and inspire.